Hello friends, I welcome you all to this online session of a poetry paper BA Part 3. In the last session, we discussed about Victorian poetry. We tried to understand the major trends in Victorian poetry, and we decided in the last session that from this session onward in the next session onward we will discuss about the major poets of a Victorian poetry. So, as we have decided, let us start with one of the most important poets of the age, Alfred Lord Tennyson, who is also known as the most important representative of the Victorian age. So, in this unit, what we are supposed to learn? In this unit, we are supposed to understand Tennyson's relationship with the Victorian age. So we are supposed to understand how Victorian age influences the poetry of Lord Tennyson. We also try to understand or try to have an idea of Tennyson as a lyric writer. So we are also supposed to understand his contribution to the Victorian poetry, and we also discuss the poetic techniques of Tennyson, because these techniques not only influences his contemporaries, but it also influences the poets who were writing in the subsequent ages. So let us begin. So Lord Tennyson is called a representative poet of the Victorian age. When we say this, we mean that he is one poet in whose works the basic nature of the age, its achievements, doubts, and fears are best reflected. Understand, this sentence is very important. Why we call this Lord Tennyson as a representative poet? Because you can see his poetry, in fact, reflect the achievements, doubts, and fears of Victorian period or Victorian age. And as a result of that, we call him as a representative poet of the Victorian age. So, as a matter of fact, the Victorian age was an age of great progress and of the consolidation of the powers of England. Of course, as we discussed in detail about how the British Empire become stronger in India and Canada, and how his his thinking becomes his political orientation or his political pressure becomes prime even in the world politics. Naturally, a poet of this age is expected to be a full optimism. Of course, yes, all these things, social, political, cultural prosperity, brings optimism in his poetry. Most of the authors of this period write in the tone of optimism or write in connection to optimism. But Tennyson, is when we think about his contribution, Tennyson could see beyond the political and economic achievement of his time. He is a very visionary type of writing. When we see his poetry, you can understand that he is a visionary poet who can see beyond the contemporary political and economic achievements. He was studious, following the advances of contemporary science, which moved Victorian men and women to scrutinize the by biblical story of the origin of the creation on a rational basis. So you can understand that he is very studious kind of person. He learned about the contemporary science. He read about the Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, and how this Charles Darwin's Origin of Species uh, challenges the first book of Bible, that the book of Genesis, how it is challenged by on the origin of species. So he learned that, he scrutinized all these things, and as a result of that, you can see his most of his poems reflect reflect the doubts regarding the religious faith. Or many of his poems also strongly promote the scientific thinking. So this is what you can see is the uh, Tennessee Williams inspirations. So this instilled the first doubts in the realms of region. Of course, yes, the origin of species I have discussed with you in detail. Tennyson failed the emotional tremor of the people of his age. His poems document their anxiety, but Tennyson could also instill faith as he himself mastered a personal crisis and remained devoted to creativity. So this is what you can, and this balance between sanity and insanity, anxiety and calmness. This balance is characteristic of his poetry and is also a great contribution to the Victorian age. So this is what you can see. So in we are not going into detail of Victorian age because we have learned all these things, but we are only connecting this Victorian age to the Tennessee Williams, Lord Tennyson's poetry. So the Victorian age, Queen Victoria ascended the throne in 1837, introduced such economic and political measure with aid of her astute ministers that England was at the zenith of development. Of course, yes, you can see we have learned this Victorian age witnessed the economic prosperity. She did not hesitate in ending the monopoly of merchants. The old leases fair policy was replaced by just intervention and close scrutiny of market trends by state. All these things you can see boost the free economy. All these things boost the economic condition of the nation. So the major industries of coal, iron, textile and railway building continued to flourish. We see in Elizabethan period all these industries were started, incepted. In Victorian period you can see all these industries flourished at its fullest. There were other European competitors like Germany, France and Belgium, but England left them far behind. Many new machines and gadgets were either invented by British scientists or perfected by them. So, due to this rationalism, scientific rationalism, they start researching, they start inventing, they start perfecting the machines. And as a result of that, see, bicycle, camera, electric light, and telephone not only made life comfortable for Britishers, they gave rise to new industries that considerably enhanced British exports and income. Of course, yes, in this period you can see their export increased tremendously, and as a result of that, they also gain a tremendous income out of it. So, this is what the difference, this is what we see is one of the characteristic of a Victorian period, which is also marked in Tennyson's poetry. The rise of limited liability companies. So this is also, this paragraph is also very important because it suggests or it gives you a glimpse of a economics, British economy. See, we think about share market today. There are several of people who were conducting online lectures on YouTube channels regarding how to invest in the share market. See what the Britishers were doing in Victorian period. They start investing in a share market. See, we will read it. The rise of limited liability companies was a new thing for the British economy. It ended the monopoly of one family firms. So instead of one family firm, they start establishing corporates, big corporates. On other hand, it gave birth to a new era of capitalism in which British middle class had definite share. Of course, yes. So this rise of a new company, new capitalism, also had a definite share of a British middle class. So these companies were managed by board of directors, but any individual might become a shareholder. Common people cultivated the habit of investing in industrial stock, and a few depended entirely on the dividends from industry. You can see before this they were only rely on the common people of a British or England, you can see they were only relying on the agricultural production or the wages they gain from working in the industrial area. Now they have one more opportunity to invest in the share market and achieve a dividend in against it. So this is what you can see a new and all these things also bring economic prosperity in the life of common British men and women. So the picture did not remain so bright for long. Of course, as a series of conflicts jeopardized the Victorian peace and prosperity. There were troubles in Canada and India. However, Queen Victoria emerged stronger and her policies proved to be a mixture of a toughness and liberality. So this is what you can see. Even we were very much familiar with a Sepoy mutiny. 1857 we very uh, call it we should call it as the 1857 freedom war against British instead of mutiny. So this is what they were calling the Sepoy mutiny in India in 1857 compelled the Queen to be sensitive to the demands of justice and trust. So this is what it is highlighted in her period that they should be sensitive about the demands and justice of demand of justice and trust in the colonies. She rose to the challenge and in a proclamation in 1858 promised, "It is our further will that so far as may be our subjects of whatever class or creed be fully and freely admitted to any offices, the duties of which they may be qualified by their education, abilities, and integrity duly to discharge." So this is what you can see is a proclamation she made in 1858. So she promised the freedom to all class and creed. So this is what you can see a marking development in society, social British society, and this is also marked in Tennyson's poetry. The assertion of her independence and fairness in evidenced in this particular proclamation. The presence of such a wise queen, together with the long strides in commerce and industry, made the Victorian age one of the best ages of English people. Of course, yes, you can see it is known as one of the best ages for the English people because they observed economic prosperity, social stability, they observed the freedom. So this period is known as the best period of English for the English people. They enjoyed peace at home. Their children got the best of education, and they had a healthy social life. They worked hard. They had a grasp of the affair of the world. They were constantly modifying technology for better communication and facilities, and they remained deeply religious. You may think that why should we reading all these things? Because all these things are very important to understand the poetry of Lord Tennyson. All these things is reflected in his poetry, especially when we think about the grasp of the affairs of the world. In one of Tennyson's poem, you can see he is speaking about the continents. So all these things reflected in the poetry, and therefore all these things become very essential, necessary to discuss before discussing the poetry that is prescribed to us. So the this society, so see, Victorians worked hard. They had a grasp of affairs of the world. They were constantly modifying technology for better communication and facilities, and they remained deeply religious. All these things is reflected in the poetry of Tennyson. Yet, the most serious crisis of Victorian furies occurred in the realms of religion. Of course, yes, as I discussed with you, the publication of The Origin of Species in 1859. So far, science had not disturbed their faith, but the publication of Charles Lely's Principle of Geology 1830 and Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species altered the scene. So this is what you can see is the very important publications published. One is the Principles of Geology published in 1830 and the Origin of Species published in 1859. They shake the ground of a faith. They rejected the religious belief and established a new attitude which is called as a scientific attitude to look towards the world. That also shifted Victorian society from religious faith to the scientific reasoning. So Charles Lilly only studied the fossil and spoke of the great antiquity of creation. Darwin accepted it and accounted on its basis for the differentiation of animal species by theory of a natural selection. And this theory of a natural selection directly challenges the first book of Bible, that is the book of Genesis. So he rejected the idea that God, man is a creation of a God. He defined man as just a higher biological unit. So therefore, this theory becomes very important. A storm rose and shook Christianity by roots. The Victorian intellectual and writers, poets, and novelists could not ignore the scientific basis of the theory of evolution propounded by Darwin. Of course, yes, this origin of species influences the Victorian intellectuals, writers, poets, novelists. They cannot ignore, they cannot reject the scientific basis of the theory. They have to consider it, they have to rethink their religious beliefs, and eventually they have to reject the religious faith and affiliate themselves with the scientific reason. So this is what the shift we can be observed in Victorian period, in which society moves from religious faith to the scientific reality. So faith was tinged with doubt and attitudinal change had occurred, best expressed by Tennyson. As I told you, we have to connect the sociocultural milieu with the actual poetry. So here is the first evidence, first instance in which we were connecting the both the things. So in this particular period, due to the publication of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, there is a doubt created in the doubts were created in the minds of Victorian people regarding their religious beliefs. So this doubt is reflected in Tennyson's poetry. See, there remains more faith in honest doubt, believe me, than in half the creeds. So this is what you can see is the reflection of a doubt of a Victorian society in Tennyson's poetry. As I told you, Tennyson is called as a representative of Victorian age because he has reflected each and everything regarding Victorian society. He has reflected their achievements, he has reflected their fears, he has reflected their doubts, and as a result of he emerges as one of the major poets of the Victorian period. So, in view of such a spiritual crisis, it would not be easy to sum up the Victorian age in the neat phrase. Of course, yes, we can't say that it is a period of prosperity, this is a period of a peace, because at the same time you can see that there is an unrest in the society. They were thinking very seriously about their religious faith because the two three books have rejected their religious faith with scientific reason, with logic, and as a result of that they were worried, they have doubts about all these things. They have believed for a long time on Bible, and when this Origin of Species was published, you can see their ground of belief is shaken. So it was an age of prosperity, but also an age of gloomy forebodings. It was the age of imperial expansion, but also an age of colonial uprisings. So we see 1857's Sepoy Mutiny in India, even the mutinies in Canada. So there are several, even the several other colonies you can see build an uprising against the British Empire. Above all, it was an age of peace, but there was an undercurrent of sick hurry and divided aims. So this is what you can see is the Victorian age, and we should connect all these things with the poetry of Lord Tennyson. Uh, we have prepared a frame of understanding, a perceptive frame to understand Lord Tennyson's poetry. So when we read this line, there remain more faith in honest doubt, believe me, than in half the creeds. So we can immediately understand that Tennyson is speaking about the doubt, which is marked as one of the most essential tendency of a Victorian people. And this tendency is inspired, motivated by the Origin of Species, published by Charles Darwin. So this is all this connection we immediately understood. So this is what the connection between socio-political, cultural, historical, economic milieu and the actual poetry. So what we have invested all this time understanding Victorian age. We understand Victorian tendencies, literary tendencies. We understand the poetic trends in Victorian age. We invested this time understanding all these things because after understanding these things, we are able to understand the poetry. Without understanding what the doubt tendency of a Victorian uh, people, we can't understand this line that there remains more faith in honest doubt. So this is what he is thinking, he is speaking about. So we have created a perceptive frame of a socio-cultural milieu, and we are supposed to utilize it in actual in the analysis of the actual poetry of a Lord Tennyson. So we will stop here and continue the same in the next session. In the next session, we will continue with the Tennyson's life and works. Again, we try to connect with the actual influences of a Tennyson and its impact on his literary creations. So we will stop here and continue the same in the next session. Thank you for listening.